Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am making some punk rock inspired mushroom keychains from polymer clay. And if punk rock style reminds you of things like spikes, studs, and chains, those are just the type of design elements that I will be exploring in today's video. Now I have several different styles here and I have something else planned for today's tutorial, but after the tutorial I will be showcasing each of these pieces individually and talking about those aesthetics as well. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button, feel free to comment below, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Your support is very much appreciated. So for the cap, you want to start with a ball of clay that's large enough for a keychain, but not so large that it's going to be heavy. And I am going to start by making it nice and flat on the bottom. So I am just pressing it into my work surface, and we are going for a very basic mushroom shape. So you want it flat on the bottom and nice and round on the top. And I am going to draw out the edges just a little bit. You don't want a corner there, so keep them nice and round and try to keep everything centered. And once you're happy with the basic shape, you can go through and smooth out any lumps or fingerprints. And we are decorating the underside first. So I am going to start by making the hole for my stem, and I am just using the back end of my poking tool here. I am placing it right in the center, and I don't want to smash my cap. So I'm kind of twisting it a little bit, applying very gentle pressure. And once I have an indent here, I'm going to go ahead and place it in the palm of my hand and finish working that through there. And you do want to make sure that it's inset deeply enough that the finished piece isn't going to be delicate. Next, I'm going to add the gills, and I am using that same poking tool. So I am just working from the center outward, and I am going to start with some larger sections and then come back through and fill those in. And now I'm going to come back in with my finer tipped straight pen, and I am doing the same thing, except I am working both from the inside out and from the outside in as well. That is it for the bottom, and now we can start working on the top. And I want to do some stitches on either side. So I am going to start by marking my center. I'm just going to put a little dot here where my eye screw is going to go. And then I am using that poking tool, and I am just going to make a line. I'm going to go down from the dot a little bit and then drag it all the way down and around the edge there. And I want them nice and even, so I'm going to just do the same thing on the other side. And then I am going to use my razor knife to cut out a small section on each one of these. So I'm going to cut right on the line and then make some angled cuts on either side, and then just peel out that middle section of clay there. And then I'm going to use the back side of my blade here to kind of smooth up the inside there and make sure the walls are nice and flat. And I am going to do the same thing on the opposite side. This is what they look like, and I did drag them down underneath the cap a little bit. And I do want to add a few more shallow cut lines around the cap as well. So I'm starting with my razor knife this time, and I am just making some small kind of random cuts here and there around the rest of the cap. And then I'm going to come through with my poking tool again, and I am just using that to make them a little bit wider and deeper and following them underneath the cap. And now I need to make the holes for my stitches. So I have a small dotting tool here, and I am just going to mark 2 dots on either side of that primary cut line. And I want them to be nice and even on each side. So I'm going to mark them first, and then I'm going to use my dotting tool to make them a little bit deeper. And then I'm going to repeat that same process on the opposite side. And before I move on to the rest of my decor elements, I do want to add a little bit more color to this piece. So I have some dark blue chalk powder here, and I am going to be using that to fill in all of those recessed areas, starting with those cracks and I'm going to be filling in those holes as well and running it all the way along that edging. I am also going to add a little bit over the center of the top and dragging it around that bottom edge as well. This is what it looks like so far, and now we can go ahead and add the stitching. So I have a long thin rope of this black clay, and I am going to start by cutting out 4 sections. They don't have to be the same size. You just want them long enough that you can grab a hold of them with your fingers. And I am going to take my first little section here and start by fitting it into the lower hole. And you're just going to push it in there and then get it placed so it crosses over. And once it's placed, you can go ahead and press it into the hole. On the other side, I'm going to take my razor knife, and you want to cut it just above where the hole is so that you have room to fit it inside. So I'm just going to make a cut and pull that off. And then I'm going to take my poking tool again, and I am going to very gently back that up a little bit and fit the end of it right into that hole, just like this. And I will be fitting the next section into the remaining 2 holes, crossing right over the top. This is what it looks like, and I am going to repeat that same process on the other side. And as a final step, I do want to come in and add a little bit more of that dark blue just around the edges of those holes. So now I want to add some horns to the 2 opposite sides here. So I've got 2 balls of that same blue clay and 2 larger balls of the black here. And I am starting with the blue, and you want to roll them as round as you can. And these are going to make up the base for our horns. So I am going to place it directly in the center, and you want it centered both vertically and horizontally as well on that cap. And once I'm happy with the placement, I am going to press it in very gently, and I am just flattening it so it stays put. And then I'm going to go ahead and place the other one as well. And it's best to make both horns at the same time, working back and forth like this to make sure that everything is the same size and placed in the same position. This is what they look like, and now I'm going to take my dotting tool, and I am using the larger end of it to just hollow out the centers of these. So I am going to start by pressing them in the middle and then working in a circular motion to widen and deepen that hole, and trying my best to keep it nice and round. And then I'm going to repeat that process with the other side, trying to maintain the same size and depth. And now we can make the horns, and I am just turning these into some long spikes. So I'm going to point one end and then flatten the opposite end against my work surface. And then I'm just going to taper this down until it fits nicely inside of my base here. And then I'm going to go ahead and make the other one, again, trying to keep them as congruent as possible. And now I can go ahead and fit the horns into those bases, pressing them in gently as I go. And I want to curl each one inward just a little bit. And then I'm going to take my dotting tool again, and I want to blend the seam there on that base piece into the rest of my cap. So I am just pulling it downward very gently, and I'm also applying pressure to the sides of that horn as well to ensure good adherence. Here they are, and now I'm going to take some more of that dark blue chalk and add it to the bases of those horns as well. And for my final piece of decor on these, I am using some flat back steel studs. Now these are actually fake piercings, but you could certainly make them out of clay. I am using 4 of these smaller ones, and I am going to place them on either side of that stitching right in between the horn and the stitches. This is what it looks like, and now we can go ahead and add the eye screw here to the top, and I am using a much larger one because it is going to be a keychain. And then I've also got a much smaller eye screw here that I am going to be putting on the underside of the cap, just below one of those horns. Here it is, and I seem to have rubbed off a great deal of that blue chalk, so before I put it in the oven, I am going to go through and touch it up with some more of that. And to start with, I'm only going to bake the cap for about 20 minutes, and then we can move on to the stem. So now that this piece is baked enough to handle, I am going to go ahead and work on the stem. I am using that same blue color, and I am going to start by just tapering the end of it to fit in that hole in the cap. For texture on my stem, I am using that poking tool again, and I am just making some deep lines on the bottom and top edge, just like we did around the edges of the cap. This is what it looks like, and I do want to add some decor to my stem, but I want to keep it nice and simple. So I am going to go with some smaller horns, just like the ones that we did on the cap. I've got 4 balls here, and they're different sizes. So I'm going to start with one kind of low on the front here, and then I'm going to take this little tiny one and place it, just below it here. And then the other 2, I am just going to stagger around the rest of that stem. I'm going to put that one kind of high and this one a little bit lower. And then I am just going to go through with my dotting tool and hollow those out like we did on top, and then make some black spikes to fit inside of them. And again, I'm going to go through with my fingers and just curl each one of these slightly upwards. And now I'm going to use some of that dark blue chalk powder the same way we did on the cap. I am applying it in between those cracks on the bottom and top edging and around all of those little horns. This is what it looks like, and this piece is finished. I am going to go ahead and fit it to my cap with a little bit of liquid Sculpey and bake it for about an hour longer. Here is the finished piece. I added a small feather charm on the underside of the cap here, and I added some light blue dot work on the base of the cap and the stem as well. And this was kind of an afterthought, but I think it was a great idea. I sealed this with UV resin so it's nice and shiny, and I am super happy with the way that it turned out. Now let's have a look at the rest of my designs. Now these are the first few that I made, and they are much simpler. I've got 3 spikes and 3 studs evenly spaced around the center, and then a length of chain here on the edge. And for the stems, I went with some painted stitches and color to match the cap. And these 3 are basically the same. I played around with some different sizes and colors. These 2 have belts on the bottom rather than just color, and the stitching patterns are a little bit different on all of them. And then this one has a little charm attached to the underside of the cap. These 2 have a slightly different cap style. This one is very similar to the one that I made today. I used some screw heads here rather than the studs, and I've got some short spikes instead of the horns on the top. And I had deliberately avoided any cap style that was thin or hollow with these because I was worried about cracking, but I really wanted to add some piercing. So I thinned out that edge just enough to get my jump rings through there, and I also added a kind of shaggy mane to this piece as well. Now this piece is probably my favorite out of all of the styles I did. The top is very similar to this one. I've just used some screw heads rather than studs, and I also added these kind of metal plating type pieces here and there that I think look really great. This piece also has several piercings around that cap, and I really love the purple and gold together. And last but not least, I have these two, and these are my rejects, so they're not as nice as the others, but I think they're still worth showcasing. The designs are good, I just didn't execute them very well. This one has a much rounder cap style and a kind of ruffled mane, and I went with some black straps and rivets on the top, and these were done the same way that I did the bases for the horns today. I just left them empty. And then I have some spikes here on the bottom, and this one has a longer, more pointed cap style, and I went with some stitches, screw heads, and small patchwork for the cap here. And then rather than piercings, I used those same rivets and added a jump ring to the outside, and then just embedded my chain right in the hole there. Those are all of my mushrooms, and you'll notice that my spikes on all of these pieces are very short and stubby, and that was just because I was worried about them being broken. But you can certainly change them up depending on what you're using them for. The piece that I made today, I intend to hang from my purse, so I wasn't worried about the extra length there. And you'll also notice that all of my spikes have this little jump ring on the end of them, and that isn't just for looks. If you fit the jump ring around the spike before placing it, the jump ring provides a nice sturdy base so that you can press that spike in without ruining the spike or the cap. That is all for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please comment below and let me know which of these other mushroom styles you would like to see rendered in clay. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.